and welcome to Denton's Tales of the Viking Age. This time, I'd like to talk about the Einherjar, which literally means one who fights alone, or the once fighters. Namely, those who died in battle and were carried aloft by the Valkyries, or the Valkyries, as it is in English, carried to the home of the gods, Asgard, there to enjoy themselves, fighting each other and feasting with the gods in Valhalla. They were also known by a term that translates as the weapon dead men, or in other words, men who have been killed by a weapon in combat. So there were two requirements for that free ride with the Valkyria. One, you had to be a man. And two, you had to die in battle with one of these in your hand, or at least a weapon of some kind in your hand. It didn't necessarily have to be a sword because, well, a lot of men wouldn't have had one of these. They were quite expensive. But as long as you had something in your hand that you could use to kill somebody else, be it an axe or a spear, a fish spear, a hay fork, it didn't really matter. Once you could kill somebody with it and you had it in your hand, when they shoved something like this through your guts and you died heroically on the battlefield, well, that would do. Any man who died of natural causes, such as old age or sickness, boring things like that, or fell out of a ship and drowned, got trampled by a runaway horse, or fell off a cliff, well, he wasn't going to feast with the gods in Valhalla. No. Sorry about that. He'd be doing his feasting in the High Hall, as it was called, of the goddess Hel, in her realm of the dead in Niflheim, also known by the same name as its ruler, Hel, and spelled with one L, as would most, though perhaps not all, women. And of course, children. I'll come back to the subject of women in a moment in that regard. Now, women did not go to Valhalla, nor would children or non-combatant men. Valhalla was strictly reserved for warriors, a sort of a boys' club, you might say. And of course, its name means the Hall of the Warriors Slain in Battle, from Val, meaning specifically one killed in battle, and Hall, meaning a hall. The popular term Valhalla is incorrect, by the way. But that term being quite modern, in fact, it was first used in 1768. And in Old Norse, it was Valhall. And just as wrong as the name Valhalla is the idea that it was the home of the gods. It wasn't. The gods lived in Asgard, or Asgard in English. And Valhall was simply a building in Asgard. I know, a very important and elaborate one, to be sure, roofed with shields, but just one building among many. Most of the gods having their own halls, and Valhalla was Odin's hall for dead warriors. Now, the Hall of the Warriors Slain in Battle, that does raise the question, would a woman who died in battle with a weapon in her hand, have gone there? Since technically, that would make her a warrior. Well, there's no answer to that. There's no mention of it anywhere, and the weapon dead men concept would seem to rule it out. Though one can speculate that perhaps in that case Freyja, who took half the warriors brought by the Valkyria for herself, might have taken such a one to her own Hall of Heroes, Sessrúmnir, and perhaps some other women as well, about which I'll have more to say in a moment. Now, being brought to Valhalla in the sagas and poems shouldn't be seen as a reward for something. Like, you lived a good life, you were honest, and you did kind deeds all over the place. So you were rewarded with a special delivery trip by the Valkyrie to Asgard. No, it was not a reward for anything to do with one's character as such. The most evil, violent, horrible men who raped and pillaged from morning to night, and everybody hated their guts, got that free ride skywards just the same as decent, kind, caring men who adored their family, loved flowers, and petted kittens. Nor was being sent to hell a punishment for anything. You went to hell not because you were a bad person. You went there simply because, well, you were dead. And hell was the realm of the dead, with the same name as the goddess who ruled it. And it was more or less a continuation of many of the things people had done in life. Going to the Norse hell was not a sign of any wrongdoing or misbehavior, unlike the Christian concept of hell as a place of everlasting punishment for evildoers, where they were prodded by laughing demons with pitchforks as they burned eternally in fire and brimstone. Burn, sinners, burn! No, nothing like that. Everyone, the good, the bad, and the ugly, you might say, went to the Norse hell and sort of lived happily ever after, more or less. The goddess Hel was simply the custodian of the dead, nothing more. She had no punishment role, unlike the Christian idea of Satan. Nor did she have any say in when, how, or where a person died. That was entirely up to them. Hel didn't kill anyone. She had no say in the manner of their death. She simply looked after them in her realm once they were dead. And she could even prepare special feasts in her hall for important new arrivals. One can't really see Satan doing that. No, definitely not. She was thus not really goddess of death. She was the goddess of the dead. It's not quite the same thing. It's subtle, but it's different. As I said, just as going to hell was not a punishment, so too being taken to Valhalla was not a reward. It had nothing to do with your character or your lifestyle. It didn't matter if you had lived a blameless, kindly life, feeding the poor and sheltering the homeless, or you had been a bad-tempered, nasty bastard who didn't give a shit for anyone and was hated by everybody. You could end up in Valhalla feasting with the gods just the same, because you weren't there of how you lived. You were there because of how you died. You had to die in a particular way. Yes, our old friend, this thing, once again. You had to get one of these or something equivalent shoved through your guts, and that was what got you there. Your ticket to the feast was that weapon in your hand as some other warrior shoved his through your guts, and you expired heroically. And very often that death wasn't a matter that the other man was better than you. In fact, he was probably the inferior warrior. But he'd win because you were better than he was. That's a bit of a contradiction, isn't it? You're better, more skilled, but your superior fighting ability gives the other guy the victory. Well, yes, it's true. In the sagas, a great warrior could be killed by the Norse equivalent of Homer Simpson, who didn't know the hilt from the pointy end of a sword. How is that possible? Well, you see, that's because you weren't always fighting just your opponent, your skill against his skill. No, you were fighting Odin as well, or at least you were fighting him through his messengers, the Valkyries, and you weren't going to win that one. Oh, no. The other man, your inferior, as far as fighting skills went, killed you because Odin had decided you were better than he was, and he wanted you to join him in Valhalla rather than the other man, because Odin wanted your superior fighting ability for himself. He wanted the best fighters he could get for his army of the dead. So being a great fighter, well, that could seriously decrease one's lifespan, while lesser men could fight battle after battle without a scratch, having to wait in line after the great warriors for their turn for a ride to Valhalla. Of course, great and noble warriors were admired, yes, but their fighting skill was the ultimate requirement for a seat at Odin's table, or Freyja's for that matter, since Odin wanted warriors to help him in the final great battle that would bring about the end of the world, Ragnarok. And combat skills, of course, would be much more useful to him than charm of manner or lovable personality. He wanted you to kill people, not hug them and kiss them in friendship. And since Ragnarok might occur sooner than expected, I never knew what the likes of Loki might do by way of a surprise. Oh no. Because of that, Odin didn't want to wait too long for any great warrior to die. He wanted them up there, ready, willing, and able to join the battle when it came. He could wait for the also rans. They'd probably be pretty useless in a battle anyway. The title Valkyria means choosers of the warriors slain in battle, from Val, which I've already mentioned, and Kyria, a feminine term meaning one who chooses something. And that is what they did. Not simply bringing those killed in battle to Valhalla, just scooping up dead warriors and riding off into the sky with them, but often actually choosing which of them would die, and then assisting the unchosen man to kill the chosen one, because that is what they had been ordered to do. Odin gave the Valkyrie their orders before they left for the battlefield, telling them who he wanted to win or lose, as the case might be, and his choice would normally, of course, be the better warriors, because they were the ones he wanted to get first. He could wait for the others. The better you were in combat, the greater your chance of being killed, not by your opponent as such, but by the Valkyrie, who would intervene and assist him on the orders of Odin. Normally, of course, the victor in a fight is the one who is the best fighter, the one with the greatest skills, which seems pretty obvious. But if Odin's knowledge of a man's ability, based on previous example, told him that man was better than the other, and would thus probably kill him, sending the lesser warrior up to Valhalla, not the better one, which is the one he wanted, well, Odin would just rig the game, you might say, to get the outcome he desired. And once he did that, well, you were pretty much screwed. You were going that way. So what did the once fighters actually do after they got that free ride with the Valkyria? One could say eternal fun and games, which made up for getting killed, of course. Drinking and feasting by night and fighting in the courtyard by day. Never-ending merrymaking. Or, well, at least never-ending until Ragnarok should come. Since Ragnarok hasn't come yet, or, well, if it did, I, for one, completely missed it, one must assume they're all still at it in Asgard. Fighting and feasting, feasting and fighting, feasting and fighting, feasting and fighting, feast. It's like Groundhog Day. Yeah. But as to what they did. Now, fighting was clearly a very important part of the daily afterlife in Asgard. The warriors keeping up their skills as they battled one another in the courtyard. And in one poem, the disguised Odin is asked what they did for entertainment when they weren't feasting and drinking. And he responds that every day the once fighters get dressed and put on war gear and go out into the courtyard and fight each other and fall upon each other. This is their sport. When dinner time comes around, of course, they all troop back into Valhalla and the nightly drinking and feasting commences once again. What a great way to have a battle, since, all the warriors couldn't actually die, like they were already dead. So you could get an axe buried in your head, a spear through your guts, or an arm chopped off, and you could simply laugh as you whacked off a piece of the other guy before you both went in and feasted together, good as new. I think I'd be quite happy to go into combat under those conditions. A great advantage of life, or perhaps I should say death, for the once fighters, was the fact that there was an attractive staff to wait on them, since the role of the Valkyria was twofold. Firstly, bringing the dead warriors to Valhalla, but then changing into their role as bar staff and waitresses, serving meat and drink to the warriors as they feasted, and probably providing rather more, intimate services as well. You know what I mean. In fact, the servant role of the Valkyria was really their primary function, rather than riding through the sky with dead warriors slung across their horses, though it is in their dead warrior transporting role that they are always seen. I don't really think I've seen any real mention of the other side of their duties as even really being important. But think about it. How often would their corpse collecting services actually be required? Even in the Viking Age, great battles or even minor disputes between a couple of jarls were not occurring every day. Weeks could go by without anyone being killed in combat anywhere. So, that would have meant the Valkyria spending most of their time sitting around playing board games or tending their horses, polishing their spears or discussing the weather, had they not had another role to play in Valhalla. The once fighters, they feasted every night and probably did a fair bit of drinking in between fighting during the day, all year round. So the waitress role of the Valkyria was required 24/7, 365 days a year, making that their primary function. They are mentioned as being told to rise up, to strew the bench, and scour the beakers, wine to carry as for a king's coming. They are mentioned in Grimnismal as waiting in Valhalla, there to serve drink and see to the tableware and the drinking vessels. So you see, flying collectors of dead men, waitresses and bar staff, and other things, what today we might call multitasking before multitasking was invented. The Valhalla catering department, I must say, was impressive, able to deal easily with the considerable numbers of once fighters gathered in the hall, and there were a lot of them. Half of those warriors who'd fallen in battle since the beginning of time, in fact. Yes, only half of them, something I'll come to in a moment. But, that was still a lot of warriors. But despite the numbers, there were no shortages of food or drink. I'm sorry, sir, but number 23 is off the menu today. Sort of thing did not occur. Oh no, there was a never-ending supply of mead produced by a divine nanny goat. The goat, Heidrun, never ran dry, being always on tap and in full production, her udder filling a huge cauldron from which all the once fighters could drink their fill without it ever being empty. Meat was in abundance too, roast boar being the house specialty. Again, the produce of a divine animal, a great self-rejuvenating boar that was slaughtered, cooked, and eaten each night, bouncing back alive and well the next day to be slaughtered, cooked, and eaten all over again the following night, and so on, day after day, till Ragnarok. I defy Gordon Ramsay to top that one. The once fighters were, of course, very special to Odin, and he was sometimes referred to as Valhalla, meaning father of the warriors slain in battle. The dead warriors regarded as his post-death adopted sons, you might say. And there were a pretty considerable number of them, as I mentioned, since half the warriors who'd fallen bravely in battle with a weapon in their hand since the creation of the world were there in Valhalla, with many more yet to come. The Valkyria ever ready to fly to earth and supervise the slaughter, as in one passage from a poem where Odin sends two of them, Gundel and Skogul, to choose among the kingsmen who will die and join him in Valhalla. Though it's usually stated that all the warriors who had ever died were there, and some Norse poems even suggest the same thing, that isn't really true. And in fact, it was half of those dead warriors who feasted with Odin in Valhalla, because he took only half of those men brought by the Valkyria. And the great goddess Freyja took the other half, bringing them to her own hall of heroes called Sessrúmnir. Most accounts, you will see, state that dead warriors feasted in Valhalla with Odin. That's it. But like many things about the Old Norse, that is a misconception. Just like the role of the Valkyria, seen as simply gatherers of dead men who did nothing but ride forth to battle on a daily basis as armies battled each other all over Scandinavia. Sessrúmnir, its name roughly translates as the seat room, or it could be seen as the room with many seats, is mentioned a number of times in connection with Freyja and with the dead warriors. One poem in the Poetic Edda stating that the goddess was the possessor of the fallen slain and of Sessrúmnir. And in another, she is said to have the hall Sessrúmnir and that it is large and beautiful. In the poem Grimnismal from the Poetic Edda, Odin mentions the various halls in Asgard, and when he comes to the ninth, he says, "The ninth is Folkvang, where Freyja decrees who shall have seats in the hall. The half of the dead each day does she choose, and half does Odin have." Now, he's actually mentioning the hall's location in Asgard rather than the building itself, since Sessrúmnir was said to be located in Folkvanga, which translates as the field of the host, or the army field. Or it could be seen as the people's field, depending on how you see the translation of the word folk, which seems to have been a field or a meadow of some kind. In a skaldic poem from the 10th century called Thorsklopa, the Lay of Thor, written by a skald named Elifur, it states that Freyja is the possessor of the fallen slain and of Sessrúmnir and tomcats. Yes, tomcats. She was drawn in a chariot by cats. That's all we know about them. In another mention of it in the Poetic Edda, Odin refers to Freyja as the most glorious of the gods, and that she has a dwelling called Folkvanga, and whenever she rides to battle, she gets half of the slain, and the other half, Odin. Now, that raises some questions. Freyja is mentioned as riding to battle, presumably with the Valkyria. So is Freyja herself one of them, or is she simply riding with them? And either way, do they bring Freyja her share of the fallen, or does she get them herself? Well, we really don't know. There's no mention of that. Another interesting thing is the possibility that some dead women didn't go to hell, but may have joined Freyja in Sessrúmnir. In Egil's saga, when Egil refuses to eat, a hunger strike if you like, his daughter, Thorgerda, decides to join him, saying she will not eat and will starve herself to death. I quote, "Thorgerda replied in a loud voice, 'I have had no evening meal, nor will I do so until I join Freyja.' She doesn't want to go on living after her father and her brother are dead. So it would seem that some women as well as warriors were taken by Freyja to reside in her own hall, something that is generally overlooked. Now, I've no idea if Freyja had a magic mead producing goat of her own or an everlasting joint of roast meat, but one must assume that she had some form of catering arrangement. Or, well, perhaps they just sent it over from Valhalla, a sort of delivery service. Meals on feet, if you like. Now, you might think Valhalla would have been rather crowded, to say the least, standing room only, so to speak, but that was not the case. A disguised Odin telling in one poem that Valhalla is still roomy, despite the huge numbers who dwell within it, due to its massive size. Valhalla was very big, obviously. I mean, sheer logic would tell us that given the number of warriors who feasted in it, though no actual measurements are ever given for it. And the same must have been true of Sessrúmnir as well, for the same reason. Though we don't have descriptions of it as we do of Valhalla, which is described as shining and golden, rising above its surroundings when viewed from a distance, being very high, so that it was hard to see over it. The roof was tiled with golden shields, supported by spear shafts as rafters. Coats of chainmail were strewn across the benches, and shields decorated the walls. There were 640 doors, which 800 men could leave from, so that when Ragnarok should come, the warriors could very quickly assemble outside. Thus, Valhalla was quite a monumental structure, and Sessrúmnir also, we must assume, given that it accommodated the same numbers as did Valhalla, half the total number of dead warriors going to each of the two halls, suggesting both buildings would have been of a similar size, though there are no descriptions of Sessrúmnir given in the sagas, as I've said, but we must assume they were both, well, much the same as far as size went, and probably in other ways as well. So, after all the drinking and feasting and fighting and other things, what was this momentous event that it was all leading up to? What was it that Odin was assembling his army of the dead to fight, this Ragnarok, its name meaning the fate of the gods? Well, this event had been foretold to Odin by a dead Volva, whom he consulted on a trip down to Hell. So he knew what was coming, and he knew it in great detail. But the basic idea, of course, wasn't just an old Norse belief. It has counterparts elsewhere, known by various names. The end of days, Armageddon, the apocalypse, with the four horsemen riding across the sky, bringing war, famine, pestilence, and death in their wake. The giant wolf, Fenrir, who it was prophesied would actually kill Odin himself, had been securely bound in chains by the god Tyr, who had lost a hand in the process. But Loki turns on the gods. Not like anybody really should have been surprised seeing that coming. And Fenrir's chains are broken, releasing him. In Jotunheim, the realm of the giants, a crimson rooster called Fagala, whose name means the deceiver, crows out a signal to the Jotnar, or giants, as do two other roosters, an unnamed soot-red rooster in Niflheim, who crows to warn the goddess Hel, and the golden rooster, Gullinkambi in Oskada. As the poem Volspa puts it, then to the gods crowed Gullinkambi. He wakes the heroes in Odin's hall, and beneath the earth does another crow, the rust-red bird at the bars of Hel. Garmr, the hound that guards the gates of Hell, howls and breaks his bonds and is set free. Though it's actually possible that Garmr and Fenrir are actually one and the same, with chains being mentioned. And Hell herself rides out of Niflheim, leading the dead. General chaos starts breaking out. Brothers are fighting brothers. The great Midgard serpent, Jormungandr, thrashes about, causing great waves that crash onto the land. The waves releasing the Naglfar, a ship made entirely from the toenails and fingernails of the dead, with an army of Jotnar on board, Loki himself, according to some accounts. Yggdrasil, the great tree of life, shudders. Heimdall, guardian of Bifrost, the rainbow bridge, sounds his horn in warning. And just like the Christian idea of the archangel Gabriel and his trumpet, when Heimdall blows that horn, well, you know you've got big problems. The Einherjar pour out of the 640 doors of Valhalla, ready for battle, and their compatriots in Sessrúmnir do the same, joining Odin and the other gods, and a monumental conflict ensues. Odin is eaten, swallowed whole by the great wolf Fenrir, but then the wolf is killed by Odin's son Vidar. Another son, Thor, kills the great serpent Jormungandr with his mighty hammer Mjolnir, but dies himself moments later, covered in the monster's venom. Oh well. The sun and the moon are finally caught by Skoll and Hati, the wolves who have pursued them across the sky for eons, and the whole world goes dark. It gets worse, actually. Flood, fire, you name it. There's a lot more, but that's enough to give you the picture of why Odin wanted his army of the dead warriors. But why, you might ask? And that's a good question. If all that was foretold by the Volva, and he knew that he was going to be lunch for Fenrir, whatever he did, he had no choice. That was going to happen. The once fighters would be as much use as a bucket with a hole in it. So why is he so obsessed with his dead warrior collecting? Something that, on the face of it, is pointless. There's no mention in the old poems of his thinking in that regard, just that he wants them for the final great battle. Even though on the face of it, they might just as well sit out the final battle, stay in Valhalla, eating and drinking while everybody kills everybody else. They're useless as far as its outcome is concerned. Now, personally, I'm inclined to think that Odin, like Scrooge in the Dickens story A Christmas Carol, wasn't totally sure if the Volva's prophecy was of events that will be, that cannot be altered, no matter what is done, or events that may be altered if changes are made, and thus can be altered. In that case, the once fighters make complete sense. They could be the deciding factor. Odin's obsession with getting all those dead warriors seems to me to suggest that he is thinking along the lines of Scrooge, who alters his fate by a change of action. Though, of course, we're never told in the old poems what Odin's reasoning actually was, just that he wanted them to fight for him at Ragnarok, which would seem rather pointless if he knew he was going to lose regardless of what he did and make a snack for Fenrir. So, there we have the story of the once fighters, and the Valkyria who chose them, brought them, and served them, and presumably would join them in battle at Ragnarok, probably becoming the cavalry of Odin's army. Well, I hope you found that interesting. Didn't actually fall asleep during it. And so until next time, I shall say farewell. Bye for now.